A big consideration for authors when we first start writing our book is what point of view are we going to use to tell the story? So the most popular point of views are first person and third person. So we are going to discuss that in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to start today with talking about first person and why authors, writers really do enjoy writing from the first person point of view and why you might want to consider it when you write your story.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
Welcome to the Julia Monte channel. If we're just meeting, I am Julia Monte. I'm a women's fiction author and I'm here to share some writing tips with you every Friday. So I hope that you find these helpful today, and if you do, please hit the like button, the share button, and leave me some comments. I'd love to read what your thoughts are. Okay, so let's talk today about point of view. We're going to talk about first person point of view and why first person point of view is really popular with writers. And one of the reasons is probably the biggest reason is that it feels very much like dialogue. It feels like you are writing. That character that your story is about is actually talking, right? The character is telling us the story. So it makes it very easy for the writer to get into the head of the character because they're speaking in that first person point of view. I did this, I went all over, right? So what's happening with this character is that the character is thinking, the character is making decisions, the character is having conversations in their own mind as well as with other people. And we get to see that all. We get to experience that all as readers. And as writers, we get to share it from that perspective. So I'm going to talk today about 4 reasons why you might want to use the first person point of view. And then I'll tell you a little bit about maybe some of the drawbacks about using first person and why that might not be the point of view that you want to use. So the first reason is that immediacy that we feel with the character, both as writer and reader. So we feel that closeness to the character. And as a writer, that's really great because it keeps us in character better. So when we're writing and we're saying I, right? I, then we're feeling it more as a writer. It's easy to get in that character's head and say, okay, well, if I was that character, what would I be seeing right now? What would I notice? How would I feel about certain things? What reactions would I have? And it's a lot easier, right, to do that when you're thinking like, okay, I did this, rather than he or she, right? The character walks into a I don't know, whatever, a store, a restaurant, and all of a sudden somebody comes in right after that person with a gun and holds up the store. So when you're saying, well, she did this, or she, she, you're removed, right? You're removed from that character. But if you're saying you're feeling that closeness, like I I heard those words and I turned around and there was a gun pointing to the back of my head. Okay, so you feel that closeness, and the reader feels that too. The reader feels that closeness to the character as if it's happening to them. They can get into character a lot better. So one of the reasons that we tend to like that first person is we can get into that character's head a lot easier, and and feel what they're feeling. Okay, and typically when we're writing that first person, we're writing as if it's happening right now. So we tend to write in present tense, which again gives us that immediacy, right? It can be in the past tense, and I've read a lot, and I've actually written where it is in the past tense, but it tends to happen more when you're telling something that happened like in your childhood, right? So I'm sitting at my desk, and then I remember that that same scent. I light a candle. I remember when I was 3 years old, and I smelled that, right? So it can jump into past tense, but typically it's in first person and it's in present tense. So again, we feel that closeness. So that's one of the first things. It's just that feeling of really bonding with that character, understanding that character, because we're going through the events at the same time as the character is going through it. Feels that way anyways. Okay, another thing about first person that makes it a very nice point of view to use is that with first person, we can really understand and see the character's personality. And so this can come with a drawback though, okay? So because we are in that voice, right? We're in that character's voice. We're telling you what happened, and the issues and how we're feeling and the decisions we need to make and all those things that the character is thinking and doing. Then we get to see, does this character have a sarcastic personality? How does that character deal with somebody who's being rude to them? How does the character deal with all this? So the drawback is that the personality has to be something that's attractive. It doesn't mean that it has to be, that we have to like the character, okay? But we have to find that character interesting enough to want to listen to this character's voice for an entirety of a book. So if the character, maybe the character is a little funny, maybe the character is a little sarcastic, maybe the character has a really bizarre way of thinking about things. Whatever it is, it has to attract the reader enough that the character's going to want to listen to it, because again, we do feel that closeness to the character. So if the character is not interesting to listen to, we're not going to want to read the full book. Now, one of the first books that, well, I don't know if it was the first books, but one of the books that made an impression on me, right, as a writer, was when Bridget Jones' Diary came out. Now, prior to that, I was writing in third person. I was writing all my books in third person, and I will talk about that when we talk about third person next week. But I was writing in third person because I was writing romances, and all the romances that I had picked up, all the romances that I had read, they were all written in third person. So of course I wrote in third person. But when Bridget Jones' Diary came out, that was a first person book. And so if you haven't read that book, then they made a movie out of it, all kinds, right? So, but it was sort of the launch of chick lit, which was the single girl, usually living in a big city, who is trying to figure her life out, trying to figure out, who to date, what kind of job they want, all of this, right? So kind of young 20s. And that heroine, that character, had a very 20-something voice, was very, sometimes a little insecure, sometimes a little chatty, sometimes a little goofy, right? Because they're making these weird decisions or going on weird dates that went wrong. And so the voice was interesting to listen to, because you're listening to this character again be kind of funny, be kind of weird, be kind of witty sometimes in the way they responded to other people, and the thoughts going through that character's head. So it was interesting to listen to see, like, okay, how is she going to get herself out of this? How, she's thinking these weird things, but it was interesting. So the voice is very important with first person. So your character has to have a voice that you want to listen to. So you have to be able to, as the writer, to get into that character's mind and to speak using that character's voice. And that can be a little challenging because you're not the narrator sitting outside of the character. You are the character. That narrator is the character. So that voice has to be the character's voice, and it has to be attractive enough or interesting enough that the reader really wants to spend time with that character. Okay, the other benefit is, which might not sound like a benefit, but it is that you can write an unreliable character a lot easier in first person. So why would you want to write an unreliable character? Well, there could be many reasons why you might want to do that. So you might not want the reader to be able to, because we are in this character's head, we're not just outside watching, right? We are in this person's head. And sometimes we don't want to know everything, right? So sometimes the character might be doing something or thinking something that is, you as a reader are thinking, well, this is kind of a bizarre thing that this character is doing. So the character might believe something. For example, she might believe that she's a great friend, right? I'm such a wonderful friend. I'm always there for my friends, and they're not there for me. And then the actions, though, that you watch the character do, in your mind, you're thinking, that doesn't seem like something that a good friend would do. And so you can see that the character is kind of unreliable. You don't really want to believe everything that this character is saying, and it's a lot of fun to do this as a first person. And I read a book, and I'm trying to think of the book. I think it was by Sally Hepworth, and it was called The Good Sister. And they had actually multiple unreliable characters there, because there was one sister that was slightly autistic, and so you weren't really sure if you could believe what she was saying. But then her sister was supposedly taking care of her and really cared about her. But then you start to notice that she's doing some things that don't seem like she really has the sister's best interest in mind, and that she's really trying to manipulate her sister. And so it's a very interesting story, because you're following these two, and you're thinking, okay, this sister is the one I can trust. And then you're thinking, well, maybe not. Maybe this is the sister I should be trusting, but maybe not. So it makes it, again, a very interesting read for readers, because you're not quite sure, like, which person is the one that is the honest one here, and and which one's the one that I should be rooting for. So it gets a little, it's just a sort of a fun thing. And you can do this in first person a lot easier, because as a third person narrator, you might, right, what you're seeing a lot more than you are as a first person character. So the unreliable character works really well in first person. So what are the issues with first person? Why is it that you might want to avoid first person? Well, there could be quite a few reasons. One of them is that you really only know what the character knows, and that can be very limiting. So some writers don't like that. They really want to be able to explore other perspectives. And so when you're stuck with just one person, then there's a lot that you can't tell. There's a lot that you can't show the reader. And some writers really don't like that. So that could be one drawback, that, you're very, very limited on first person, and you don't get the sort of the wider scope of what is happening in the story. You can't tell the reader things that the main character doesn't know. Okay, and another drawback is that sometimes you can fall into the person's head too much. There could be too much introspection. So with that first person, you're in that person's head, and the person's always thinking, right? So think about yourself, right? You're always thinking something. You're always evaluating something. What does this mean? And what is it? How do I feel now? And why do I feel this way? And should I feel this way? And all of this, right? This is happening with your character as well, but you don't want to share all of that, because it just becomes too much. And you're still writing a novel, you're still writing a story, if it's a short story, and you still want to show more than tell. So you don't want to tell everything. You actually want your character in scenes. You want your character doing things, experiencing things, and you want to be able to show that. Of course, you're going to filter it through the character's brain and through the character's perspective, but you want to not do that all the time. Like, you don't want to be in thought the whole time, because it gets bogged down and you're not really moving the story forward. Okay, so pay attention to, am I spending too much time telling the reader how I feel, rather than just saying, okay, I'm going to create a scene and I'm going to have the character go through the scene as if I was, as in any point of view. And then of course I'm going to have my perspectives and show what's going on based on what the character is experiencing, but it's not all introspection. Okay, so just be careful with that, because that can bog your story down. And something that's connected to that is if you're constantly telling the reader how you feel, right? So again, that's a little tempting, because again, you're in that character's point of view, right? So for example, the character is waiting for her date to show up, and checks her watch and says, or checks her phone and says, well, he hasn't texted me, and it's been 10 minutes, and he's 15 minutes late, and he's 20 minutes late, and he's 30 minutes late, and I'm so pissed off, and how could he do this to me? And he's always late. He's not supposed to be late, and we've talked about this before, and he's still late, and now it's 35 minutes, and and then you're just showing and really talking, right, and showing the feelings. And I'm so angry. Okay, well, rather than doing that, just like with any other point of view, you want to show that. It's much more effective to, instead of saying I'm so angry, to watch the character get angry, right? So checks the phone, 15 minutes late, puts the phone down, texts and says, "Where are you?" Feeling, feeling the heartbeat, whatever, getting into the feelings. What is that person feeling? Gets up, slams something, whatever, to show the character getting angrier rather than saying, "I'm getting so angry, I can't believe," right? So you don't want to do that, but just, spend too much time telling the person how they feel, or "I'm so scared," or whatever. Just show us that the person's getting angrier. Maybe the date comes in and says 35 minutes, goes into the room, slams the door shut. That shows that the person is angry rather than just saying, "I'm so angry." So be careful with that. But other than that, first person really is, I think, a great point of view to use. It's one of the most popular ones. It's not the most common. It's still, third person is still more common than first person, but it's a very popular one. Writers really like it, and again, readers really like it. Now, why? Why is it that it's a popular point of view? And I have, just, I guess, a theory, and it could be wrong, but I think, okay, that it has to do with it just feels natural. If we think of back when we were little kids, or if you have little kids, it's a natural way of telling a story, right? If you, when you were young and somebody just said, "Tell me, what do you, oh, I did this and I did that," right? First of all, we can identify with ourselves a lot, right? It's an easy way to tell things because we can identify with ourselves, but it's also just the way that we started telling stories. It's always from our perspective when we're young, because that's the way it is for kids, right? It's always from their perspective. And so I remember when my kids were little, even if they were making up a story, it was always, well, they were always like the hero of the story, right? They were always the protagonist. And this happened. My son had an imaginary friend for a while, and he was always there with the imaginary friend. Well, I did this with this, right? And so I think it's just more natural to tell a story from first person than it is from third person, because in third person, what's happening? You are distancing yourself from the character. You're telling somebody else's story, which isn't as easy or natural as telling our own story. So I think that's one of the reasons that it's just such a popular, and it just feels so good to be able to tell a story from that first person point of view. And with first person, what we're really doing is we are imagining that we are that person, right? So when people say, like, put yourself in his shoes, right? If your child does something that they're not supposed to, well, put yourself in his shoes. How would you feel, right? That's what we're really asking, though, right? How would you feel? Not, imagine how he feels, but you put yourself in his shoes. You be him for a little while, and think, how would you feel? What would you think if you were that person? And that's what we're doing in first person, right? We're saying, okay, I'm no longer me. I am now that person, and I can tell the story as if I am that person. And again, it just makes it feel more natural. It feels like we're telling a story. It also creates a deeper bond, right, between us and the character, and between the reader and the character. So it's a great point of view, I think. And if you haven't tried it, give it a try. Try writing from first person if you've always written from third person. And if you have written from first person, what do you think? Leave a comment. Let me know. Okay. If this was helpful, if you enjoyed this video, then please hit the like button and the share button. Leave a comment, and I will see you again next Friday, when we will talk about third person and why that one actually is the most common point of view that writers use. I'll see you next week.